The World Cup in Qatar is going to be the last one with 32 teams in the final stage. There'll be 48 of them in 2026, which most likely won't let us witness any more groups of death. But groups of death are what we like such tournaments for, watching the best play each other. This video is about the toughest groups the tournament has ever seen, but before we start, we'd like you to answer our question. Which one of them is the best ever World Cup scorer? Pelé, Gerd Müller, Ronaldo, Miroslav Klose? Leave your answers in the comments and get ready for watching! 1958 Group 4 the USSR, Brazil, England, Austria. We all owe the 1958 World Cup, as it was then when a bright star called Pelé first came to shine, at the age of only 17. It also was the first World Cup for the USSR that came out of isolation due to Stalin's death. And the Soviets jumped right in as they got drawn against England, Brazil and Austria. In their first game they did look good against England, however the Three Lions managed to get a 2-all draw. Brazil in their turn left no chance to Austria, 3-0 was the score. Matchday 2 made the things way more complicated. Not only Brazil failed to win against England, the Three Lions defense kept the clean sheet and a goalless draw was the result. At the same time, USSR played Austria and won 2-0. So this is how things were before the final match day. 3 points for Brazil, 3 for the USSR, England 2 points and Austria 0. A win, by the way, granted 2 points instead of 3 at that time. England and Austria played in a draw in the last round, 2-2, so England and the USSR had the same number of points, which meant that all the Soviets needed was a draw against the Seleção. Brazilians, however, were on top and scored twice against legendary Lev Yashin while keeping their gates shut. Due to the rules disregarding the goal difference, the USSR and England had to play each other again. The game was won by the USSR 1-0, so they went through into the quarterfinals, as there were only 16 teams in the final stage back then. They lost to the host Sweden, while the Brazilians were only getting stronger and reached the final where they defeated the Swedes and won the title. Pelé was named the best young player, while his teammate Garrincha was clearly the best of them all. 1966 Group 3 Brazil, Hungary, Portugal, Bulgaria. The World Cup 1966 was held where it all began, in England, and there were not one but 2 groups of death. The first of them featured the hosts, the 2-time champions Uruguay, Mexico, that showed a lot of promise, and France. England and Uruguay were the 2 teams to advance in the end, while Group 3 ended up being even more dramatic. Brazil were the reigning champions and had to face Hungary, who had played in 2 finals, Portugal and Bulgaria, so all 3 of Brazil's opponents were pretty competitive sides. Ironically, the only game Brazil managed to win was against Bulgaria. After that they lost to Portugal and to Hungary, 3-1 in both games. The heroes of that group were Portugal, led by Eusebio. They were trashing one rival after another, scoring 3 goals in every game. 6 points out of 6 for Portugal. The second place went to Hungary, while Brazil were sensationally eliminated in the group stage. What happened next was no less fascinating to watch. Hungary were beaten by the USSR, while the brilliant Portugal lost to England, who reached the final. They played West Germany, and it was 2-2 at full time. In extra time, however, the hosts scored 2 more and won their first and only World Cup title ever. 1970 Group 3 England, Brazil, Romania, Czechoslovakia. 1970 wasn't the best of years for Brazil. The dictatorship that came to power was persecuting everyone opposing it and tried to use the national team as a shield. What are you all so upset about? Just look at our guys, how they play. And they were good indeed, as even the group of death couldn't stop them. England and Brazil were of course the favorites. England had won the previous World Cup, while the Seleção were pretty much always among the top contenders. Romania, however, could boast with a bunch of young players of high quality, and as for the Czechs, they won the bronze medals in 1962. Interestingly, that World Cup was when the very term "group of death" was used for the first time by the Mexican media. Both Brazil and England had a solid start. The Seleção left the Czechs 4-1, while England won 1-0 against Romania. The match between these two teams was a very close one. The only goal was scored by Jairzinho. He was outstanding and even outshone Pelé himself throughout the tournament, as the king of football was already way past his prime. In fact, that win against the Three Lions pretty much settled everything for Brazil. 4 points were more than enough, but the Seleção wanted more and won against Romania too, and that was one hell of a show. The game ended 3-2. Meanwhile, England had to struggle against Czechoslovakia and barely won thanks to the penalty awarded. So as it was expected, the two favorites went through. In the quarterfinals, England lost to West Germany while Brazil cruised past Peru, then beat Uruguay in the semis, and then there was a decisive 4-1 victory against Italy in the final. Pelé was named the best player, but that was no more than a tribute. He scored 4 goals while Jairzinho scored 7, and the Golden Boot winner Gerd Müller had 10 goals in 5 matches. 1982, Group C of the second group stage, Italy, Brazil, Argentina. The World Cup's format underwent a lot of changes. In 1982, there were 8 more teams from Asia and Africa, thus making it 24 teams which were divided into 6 groups. As usual, 2 teams were advanced, but not into the quarterfinals as there was one more group stage, 4 groups of 3 teams each. And Group C of the second group stage featured the best of the best, Italy, Brazil and Argentina. These 3 teams that had won 6 World Cups out of 11. In the very first match, Italy defeated the reigning champions, Argentina, led by Diego Maradona himself. That game was a very close one for the Argentines, unlike the one against Brazil. The Seleção were by far the better team and won 3-1, thus eliminating their arch-rivals from the tournament. The most dramatic game of that group of death was of course the last one. Italy played Brazil, and it was one of the most fascinating things the World Cup had ever seen. The headliner of the show was Paolo Rossi, the striker who hadn't scored once in the World Cup before that game. Rossi opened the score 5 minutes in, but it didn't take long for the Brazilians to make it all square. In the 25th minute he scored again. Italy were ahead and tried to protect the lead, yet Falcao found the equalizer. However, in the 75th minute there came a winner from Rossi. Italy went through into the semis, where Rossi scored a brace against Poland in addition to that hat-trick. After that, West Germany didn't cause much trouble. Italy won the World Cup, while Rossi won the Golden Boot and was also named the best player. 1986, Group E, Scotland, Denmark, West Germany, Uruguay. Yet another Mundial hosted by Mexico. Just like the previous one, it featured 24 teams, but only one group stage. Instead of the second one, the round of 16 was introduced. 12 teams that finished first and second advanced, as well as 4 best teams that finished third in their groups. Scotland, with Sir Alex Ferguson in charge, really struggled throughout the tournament. First, they lost to Denmark 1-0, while Uruguay managed to get a draw against the 1982 World Cup finalists, West Germany. The second leg was marked by a most impressive victory for Denmark, 6-1 against Uruguay. That Denmark team is surely worth mentioning. The likes of Mikael Laudrup and Elkjær, the hat-trick hero of that game, Fergie's team, in their turn, weren't good enough and lost to West Germany. The final match day could have been a sensation, but Denmark won again while Scotland finished with only 1 point. So the 2 first teams were Denmark and West Germany. Uruguay finished third and barely made it into the round of 16 thanks to the 2 draws. Uruguay suffered a defeat against Argentina in the round of 16, which was no surprise. Denmark, however, after being spectacular in the group stage, was demolished by Spain 5-1, and that was a shock. West Germany wasn't really that fun to watch, but eventually made it into the final, where they lost to Argentina. Diego Maradona was the biggest star of that World Cup, as he scored 5 goals, but what we remember him for was surely the iconic goal against England in the quarterfinal, scored with his hand, the hand of God. 1998, Group D, Nigeria, Paraguay, Spain, Bulgaria. 1998 Group D, Nigeria, Paraguay, Spain, Bulgaria. 1999 Group E, 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 Nigeria, Paraguay, Spain, Bulgaria. 1999 Group The World Cup 1998 was held in France, and Group D was a very close one. Paraguay had spent 12 years away from the World Cup final stage, but after that became frequent guests even in knockout stages. As for the other teams, the Bulgarians weren't at their best. Hristo Stoichkov's generation had grown old, while their successors were yet to come. Spain, in their turn, had a strong, star-packed squad, with young Raul as the main goal scorer. Nigeria was also a solid side, and even reached the knockout stage 4 years before. The first game of the tournament for Paraguay ended in a draw against Bulgaria thanks to the wonderful performance from Chilavert. At the same time, Spain were always in control against Nigeria, but lost concentration in the final moments and lost to the African side. It was quite a surprise. Both Raul and Hierro scored for Spain, but their team still lost, and that was just the beginning. As no one could have foreseen the further results, Chilavert kept yet another clean sheet against La Roja's fierce attack. A goalless draw, but Spain in a very tough situation. It was still possible for them to advance, but they needed a very happy coincidence. Nigeria's 1-0 win against Bulgaria made things even worse. The Eagles had already gained 6 points and gone through. On match day 3, the Spaniards found their scoring touch at last, 6-1 against Bulgaria, while Paraguay not only was good in defense, but in attack as well, as they won 3-1 against Nigeria. As a result, Nigeria finished first and Paraguay second. Who would have expected these two teams to advance ahead of Spain and Bulgaria? However, the Cinderella story ended soon. Paraguay lost to the future champions France in the round of 16, while Nigeria suffered a heavy defeat against Denmark. So neither of the group of dead survivors reached the quarterfinals. 2002 Group F: Argentina, England, Nigeria, Sweden. The first World Cup of the 21st century was held in two countries, South Korea and Japan. That was the first event of that magnitude to be held in Asia. The group stage was 32 teams split into 8 groups. Group A could be named the group of death too, as there were Denmark, Senegal, Uruguay and France. As France was the team to have won the previous Mundial, it was a shock for all the fans to see them finish 4th. But Group F was where even more interesting things happened. Nigeria managed to reach the knockout stage both in 1994 and 1998. Sweden reached the semi-finals in 1994, and the two other teams were England and Argentina. The first game, against Nigeria, was a tough one for Argentina, but Gabriel Batistuta's goal saved the day. England at the same time played 1-1 against Sweden, which surely made things worse for them. On match day 2, the Swedish legend Henrik Larsson scored a brace against Nigeria as his team won 2-1. At the same time, England and Argentina made that group a total mess. Beckham scored a penalty and England won 1-0. And now for the outcome. Sweden didn't let Argentina win, while England and Nigeria played in a goalless draw. The result was first place for Sweden, while England finished second. Argentina and Nigeria were out, but so were the other two teams soon. Sweden lost in the round of 16 and England lost to Brazil in the quarterfinal. That Brazil team reached the final and won it, thus becoming the Pentacampeones. Ronaldo was the Golden Boot winner, while Oliver Kahn was named the best keeper and the best player of the tournament. 2006 Group C: Argentina, the Netherlands, Ivory Coast, Serbia and Montenegro. The World Cup 2006 was held in 12 different cities in Germany. Group C looked by far the strongest. Argentina and the Netherlands had two teams, Ivory Coast with Didier Drogba in attack and Serbia and Montenegro, who ended up being the weakest ones. But all things considered, the group of that wasn't that much of a trouble for the favorites. In the first round, Argentina played Ivory Coast, and Didier Drogba scored for the African side, but team discipline secured 3 points for Jose Pekerman's side. The Serbs, meanwhile, did their best to hold on to a draw, but their efforts were denied by Arjen Robben. Match day 2 was basically more of the same. Argentina destroyed Serbia and Montenegro 6-0. The young Lionel Messi was among the scorers. The other fixture wasn't that one-sided, but ultimately there were 2 goals for the Netherlands, scored by Van Nistelrooy and Van Persie, and only one from Ivory Coast. The two favorites were on their way to the round of 16, and that's exactly what happened. The game between Argentina and the Netherlands was really boring. No goals were scored, as neither of the teams wanted to score, it seemed. Ivory Coast, on the other hand, played a spectacular game against the Serbs and won 3-2. But that changed nothing. The first two places belonged to Argentina and the Netherlands, as they both finished with 7 points. The Netherlands lost in the round of 16, while Argentina reached the quarterfinals, where they lost to Germany on penalties. So yes, groups of death are usually fun to follow, but that was simply not the case. 2010 Group A: Uruguay, Mexico, South Africa, France. Group G: Brazil, Portugal, North Korea, Ivory Coast. Another World Cup that offered the fans two groups of death. The first one, Group A, featured Mexico, Uruguay, led by the prime Diego Forlan, France, the silver medalists, and the host South Africa. The first round made us witness two draws. Uruguay and France scored no goals, while the South Africa-Mexico fixture ended 1-1. But the real surprise came a bit later. The Mexicans won 2-0 against France, and Uruguay demolished the African side. And then even more, yet another defeat for Le Bleu against South Africa. Nobody saw that coming, but France finished lost with only 1 point out of 9. As for Mexico, they lost to Uruguay, but still advanced ahead of the hosts due to the goal difference. The second group of death was Group G: Ivory Coast, North Korea, Brazil and Portugal, and was considered the real group of death, but once again all the expectations were deceived. On match day 1, Ivory Coast and Portugal played 0-0, while Brazil got a 2-1 win against North Korea, which was a very decent result for the Korean team. The second round made it all too predictable. A convincing 7-0 victory for Portugal against North Korea, as one of the goals was scored by Ronaldo. And Brazil did well against Ivory Coast too, 3-1 in favor of the Pentacampeones. The final match day didn't look much like football. All Portugal and Brazil were doing was waiting for the match to end. A boring 0-0 draw was what both teams wanted to advance and leave Ivory Coast no chance. The World Cup was won by Spain, though the Netherlands did give them a fight and could have easily made it into the penalty shootout, where anything could have happened. 2014 Group D: Uruguay, England, Costa Rica, Italy. And now for the number one in our list. The toughest group of death of them all to mark the 20th World Cup. It was held in Brazil, and it didn't go well for the hosts, who were among the teams tipped to win. And apart from that, Group D is surely worth mentioning. England, Uruguay, Italy and Costa Rica. It all looked like the first three teams were to compete, while Costa Rica should have been happy just to be there. But what happened is another story. In their first game against Uruguay, Costa Rica thrashed Uruguay and paid no attention to their squad. The likes of Suarez, Forlan, Cavani and Godin. They all had to watch their team lose to Costa Rica 3-1, while England got the better of Italy. The wonders went on. On match day 2, Suarez scored a brace and Uruguay won against England. And Costa Rica, they won again, 1-0 against Italy, and made it into the knockout stage. The rest of the group were to decide who was going to advance on match day 3. And could you believe it? Uruguay won against England, as Diego Godin found a very late winner, while Costa Rica didn't stop. They held to a goalless draw against Roy Hodgson's England and finished first. Just imagine someone putting a bet on them and winning it afterwards. Uruguay lost in the first knockout round yet again. Unlike Costa Rica, they reached the quarterfinals and lost to the Netherlands on penalties. All in all, that performance from Costa Rica was one of the most iconic World Cup campaigns ever. Dear friends, which one of these groups do you find the strongest? Let us know in the comments, please.